Title: The Secret Playbook: How Corporations Studied Black America. And what happened next if you walked into a corporate boardroom in America sometime in the 1950s? You might hear something that would stop you cold. Not yelling, not chaos, just one quiet, calculated question. How do we sell to Black America without changing anything else? And what makes that question even more unsettling is that they weren't asking it out loud. They were writing it down, studying it, testing it, and building an entire hidden playbook around it. This is that story. It starts in a time when Black Americans were almost completely invisible in mainstream advertising. Turn on the radio, open a magazine, walk past a billboard, and you wouldn't see them, at least not in a way that reflected real life. But behind the scenes, companies were watching very closely, because while Black Americans were being excluded socially, they were becoming powerful economically in cities like Chicago, Harlem, and Atlanta. Black communities were building wealth, businesses, and influence. And corporations noticed something they couldn't ignore. Money was being spent, a lot of it. But here's where things take a turn, because instead of openly supporting these communities, many companies chose a different strategy. They would stay silent in public and study in private. They tracked buying habits. They analyzed neighborhoods. They even used Black newspapers to quietly run ads, while publicly pretending those audiences didn't exist. It was like being watched through a one-way mirror. Then, by the 1940s and 50s, the data became impossible to ignore. Black Americans represented billions in spending power. So corporations did something they had never done before. They created a category. They literally called it the Negro market.
Have to say about selling to the Negro.
The secret of selling to the Negro is expressed in one word. That word is recognition. Now, there's nothing unusual about that. People want to be recognized. They need recognition. That's basic in all of us. But perhaps because he's had so little of it, the Negro needs even more. He needs to feel important and appreciated. This need is a very real and important one. It shows up even in many of the Negro's shopping habits. Anyone who sells or wants to sell to the Negro customer should know about some of these habits. 3 habits in particular play a big part in every sales transaction. To begin with, most Negroes buy by brand. They ask for products by name. They're quick to turn down off-brands. You see, for a long time, the Negro has been sold a lot of shoddy, second-class merchandise. So now he asks for name brands in order to make sure he gets his money's worth. Buying by brand, that's the first important Negro buying habit. Now for the second. The Negro buys good quality merchandise. Symbols of quality and prestige are very important to the Negro customer. This woman, for example, is buying fine crystalware. But she is also buying the admiration and approval of her friends and relatives. It's a well-known fact that many Negro customers are influenced by the opinions of others. What their friends may think of a certain item often decides whether or not the sale is made. So remember, the Negro buys quality merchandise. That's the second important point. And here's the third thing to remember when selling to a Negro customer. When he specifically asks for one thing, don't try to sell him something else. Don't try to switch him at the point of sale. If you do, he'll probably react something like this.
Doesn't he think I've got the money to pay for it?
There's a reason for this reaction. Again, because he's had experience with cheap merchandise, the Negro resents being offered a substitute. He wants to be sold on quality, not price. The Negro buys by brand, he buys quality, and he doesn't like to be switched at point of sale. These are the keys to selling the Negro customer. Another point. The Negro family does things together, as a group. The family works as a unit. It lives as a unit, and it buys as a unit. When you sell to one member, you many times sell to all. It's also true that many places of entertainment are still closed to the Negro.
And once they named it, began crafting campaigns specifically for black audiences. But there was a problem. They didn't understand the culture. So instead of authenticity, they leaned on stereotypes, and for a while, it worked, because there weren't many alternatives. But what these companies didn't realize was that something much more powerful was already happening, long before corporations discovered. This market, black entrepreneurs were already serving it. People like Madam C.J. Walker built entire empires by understanding something corporations didn't. That representation isn't a trend, it's trust. She didn't just sell products, she built connection, and that difference would eventually change everything. Now here's where the story shifts again, because in the 1960s and 70s, America was changing. The civil rights movement forced the country to confront inequality in ways it never had before. And suddenly, ignoring black consumers wasn't just bad business, it was bad optics. So brands started adjusting. You began to see black models in advertisements, black families in commercials, black culture entering mainstream media. But if you look closer, you notice something unsettling, because many of these companies weren't embracing black culture. They were borrowing it, using it, sometimes even exploiting it, all while still lacking real representation behind the scenes. And yet, even in that environment, black media rose. Magazines like Ebony and Jet became more than publications. They became platforms of power, spaces where black identity wasn't filtered or distorted. And for the first time, the narrative started shifting. Then came the 1980s and 90s, and this is where everything flips, because what corporations once studied from a distance suddenly took over the entire culture. Hip-hop exploded, streetwear became global fashion, and black creativity began driving trends worldwide. Brands didn't just want access anymore, they needed it. Companies like Nike and Adidas built massive campaigns around black athletes and artists, and one name in particular changed the game forever. Michael Jordan. He didn't just endorse a product, he became the product, and with that came a realization that corporations couldn't ignore anymore. They weren't leading culture, they were following it. Now, fast forward to today, and the balance of power has shifted again, because now there's no middleman. Social media has given creators direct access to millions of people. No filters, no gatekeepers, no one-way mirrors. And that means something very important. Companies can't just study communities anymore. They have to engage with them authentically. Because if they don't, it shows. And when it shows, people respond instantly, publicly, and sometimes permanently. So when you look back at this story, it's easy to think it was always about selling. But it wasn't single quotes. It was about power, who had it, who didn't, and who learned to take it back, because in the end, the most important shift wasn't corporations learning how to sell to Black America. It was Black America realizing they were never just consumers, they were the influence.